fact. Look, Al-Qaeda is a government contractor. It couldn't be more obvious. We've been saying this. Many people are saying it. You can't escape it. You can only try to spin it and say that it's incompetence, but it isn't. Going back to Curtin Emo's article, because he has an excellent article about this, analyzing what the New York Times is putting out there in a controlled release. He says, as Sam Muho states, it's not religious sectarianism or the Wahhabist drive to execute apostates under the banner of ISIS that's the problem. Rather, it is the hegemonic and imperialistic designs of the NATO governments who have on record worked with Saudi Arabia and Qatar to use Islamic extremists throughout the Middle East as their Swiss Army knife of destabilization, to reorient the Middle East into their interests. And of course, the same NATO forces did this with Gladio in Italy and elsewhere in Europe, using communism as the foil. Now we see the details of it coming out again, yet again. We've seen this exposed many times. And as we have pointed out, as Robert David Steele has pointed out, as Judge Napolitano has pointed out, every one of these domestic terrorist incidents have either been false flags or they have been patsies who have been brought in by the FBI just so they could catch them at the last minute and scare people about the possibility of terrorism. Now we see how one of these was done. This is the sting, how the FBI created a terrorist. Now this is a man named Osmakak, 25 years old. This was back in January 7th, 2012. He went into a Days Inn in Tampa, Florida, and filmed what the FBI would later call a martyrdom video. However, he was not a terrorist. He was somebody who was profoundly mentally disturbed. As they point out in the research, he was only a terrorist in his troubled mind and in the minds of ambitious federal agents. The government could not provide any evidence that he had connections to international terrorists. He didn't have his own weapons. He didn't even have enough money to replace the dead battery in his beat-up green 94 Honda Accord. The Intercept points out that he was a target of an elaborately orchestrated FBI sting that involved a paid informant as well as FBI agents. This went on for 3 months. The FBI provided all of the weapons. They gave him the supposed car bomb that he had allegedly planned to detonate. They even paid for his taxi so that he could get to where the FBI needed him to go. And psychiatrists say that he was deeply disturbed. In other words, he only became a terrorist after the FBI held his hand every step of the way, probably running the cameras for him as well. But of course, we have to surrender our freedoms and due process to protect ourselves from these terrorists. Let me tell you who the real terrorists are. The real terrorists are our own government and people in the FBI who did what allegedly happened to this Portland man who is now suing the FBI. He says, this is a Guardian story, I was tortured in the United Arab Emirates for refusing to become an FBI informant. Now, he was part of a mosque. They have tried to set up other members of the mosque, at least 9 of its members. He was essentially set up by putting him on a no-fly list. Then they tried to turn him into an informant. When he refused, they rendered him to the United Arab Emirates, where they kept him for 109 days and tortured him as they tried to pressure him into becoming an informant. He finally made it back to the U.S., and he is now suing the FBI. Now, the other part of our criminal government, the surveillance state, is moving on full speed ahead. We said this was going to happen as Richard Burr, the Republican, became head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He never saw any surveillance that he didn't like. As a matter of fact, he doesn't want you to see any surveillance that the government does. He says nothing that the NSA does should ever be made available to the public, nothing at all. So we're not going to see too many revelations coming out of this Senate Intelligence Committee. What we did see come out of it is CISPA for the 3rd time. It passed the Senate Intelligence Committee 14-1. The only person not voting for it was Ron Wyden, the person, if you remember, who put James Clapper on the spot and had him commit perjury rather than admitting to dragnet surveillance, which subsequently came out in the Snowden leaks anyway. Now, what they're proposing this time is not exactly CISPA. It's now called CISA. They've taken the P out. The P was there for protection. It's the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act. They've taken the protection out. You know what the protection was there for? It was not your protection. It was protection for the companies that are illegally spying on you, stealing your privacy, turning the data over to the federal government. It was to protect them from civil and criminal liability for working with the government in its illegal spy operations. So this is now coming back for the third time. If you remember, Aaron Swartz led the movement to defeat this the first time it came out, and it has been defeated a second time. They brought it back right after he died. Now they're going to try to ram it through. They may very well get it through with the Republicans' help. But this is what Ron Wyden had to say, the only one who voted against this. He said, if information sharing does not include adequate privacy protection, then it is not a cybersecurity bill. It's just a surveillance bill by another name. Exactly right. It's too bad we don't have more senators who are looking out for our privacy. And I don't agree with Ron Wyden on many things, but we have to join with people who are fighting to stop this surveillance state. And on this issue, he is a man of integrity as well as bravery for standing alone against the surveillance state. I don't think we're going to stop it, however, in Washington. We're going to stop it at the state level, if we're going to stop it at all. We have a bill that's been introduced in Texas by Jonathan Strickland, a Texas representative, to cut off the utilities to the NSA facilities in Texas because they are violating our privacy. They're violating our Fourth Amendment. This is something that has been tried and proposed in other states. This is something that has essentially come out of the 10th Amendment Center. They've had several state legislators have advanced this in different states. The key one, of course, would be Utah, where the giant facility there is using a massive amount of electricity and water that could power several cities out there. In this particular bill, Representative Jonathan Strickland has introduced HB 3916 in Texas that will cut off water and electricity service to all NSA data collection centers in Texas. Now, last session, he led the fight in passing one of the strongest privacy protections in the nation at the state level with an email privacy bill that required a warrant for state police to access electronic data. So thank you very much, Representative Strickland. He says he was elected to fight for liberties and privacy of all Texans, and that's exactly what he's doing. We need more representatives like him, and if you live in Texas or these other states, you need to contact your representatives and put some heat under them. Now, the question always comes up when we see the government act in criminal ways, how can they get away with that? You know, when we see an article like this next one, we see a man pull up that article who dressed as a TSA agent and sexually assaulted a woman. How do we tell someone who does that from someone who dresses up as a TSA agent, has a government check, and sexually assaults people? What's the difference? Is it because they get the government check? Is that what makes it legitimate? Is that what makes it moral? The story that we had last week, of course, about tax thieves targeting 366,000 Americans, getting $15 million from them, telling them that they were the IRS, using the same kind of con game that the IRS uses, intimidating them. How do we tell the difference between people who are pretending to be IRS agents and IRS agents who actually get a check from the government, who are using phony laws and con man practices? Look, we ought to go back, especially Christians need to understand the real meaning of Romans 13, and that is when the government acts as a criminal, it is a criminal. We need to stop giving people passes because they get a government paycheck or have an official uniform. Well, stay with us right after the break. We have a special report from John Bound on the engineered race war, as well as Rob Dew with a hilarious interview with the creator of a Hillary Clinton doll. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Another major health threat, this one in Toledo, Ohio, where everybody in the entire city has been told not to drink the water.
Ohio's governor declaring a state of emergency.
Did you know that the average person uses about 80 to 100 gallons of water at home every single day? If there's a water emergency, will you be prepared?
Panicked residents forming long lines throughout the day.
We're here at a supermarket in Toledo. You can see the shelves empty where water once was.
To stay safe and healthy during a crisis, you must must have access to safe, clean water. Water which will not be available at your local grocery store.
There's a mad dash on right now to stock up on supplies.
The ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system is a must-have for every modern, independently minded household. Protect your family's safety during an emergency. Go to InfoWarsStore.com today to purchase your ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system or call 1-888-253-3139.
Introducing Secret 12, the new InfoWars Life vitamin B12 formulation. Most forms of vitamin B12 are highly processed and synthetic and could not be properly absorbed by the body. That's why for real results, so many are having to turn to painful B12 injections, which are known to have higher absorption rates. Now, InfoWarsLife.com is excited to announce that we can bring you our most bioactive, powerful form of B12 that has been developed with our exclusive perfected process. Secret 12 is a binary of nutramedical grade, bioavailable coenzyme forms of B12, methylcobalamin, the same kind used in B12 injections, and adenosylcobalamin. Secret 12 is simply taken by mouth, right on the tongue, and then swallowed. No needles, no injections. Don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. Discover the secret. Secret 12. Secure your revolutionary Secret 12 formula right now at InfoWarsLife.com or call 888-253-3139.
To get to the heart of this country, one must examine its racial soul. Though this nation has proudly thought of itself as an ethnic melting pot, in things racial, we have always been, and we, I believe, continue to be, in too many ways, essentially a nation of cowards.
Outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder's transparent statement echoes the intent of European billionaire George Soros' attempt to divide and conquer America's diverse populace with his Open Society organization. Soros reportedly gave at least $33 million in 1 year to a range of activist groups within the United States. And he has been funding his Open Society movement since the early 90s. One of these organizations, Black Lives Matter, rather than moving in the obvious direction of unifying society, has instead marched into the lives of all Americans with their divide and conquer whining.
I gotta go to Ross right now, homie. If I don't get there, I'm gonna get fired. I got 6 kids to feed. Day goes on, homie. He's out every day. Deal with it the right way. Not like this.
This was the scene this morning. Thousands of irate commuters at a standstill, some getting out of their cars and taking matters into their own hands.
The Black Lives Matter movement, made up of mostly millennials, those born from 1980 to 2000, a generation removed from the unifying progress Americans had made since the Civil Rights Movement, a generation raised on gangster rap and video games, is going to school the older generation that lived through it on race relations?
Stripped of possessions, stripped of innocence, and then stripped of life.
Joshua Babish describes the brutal deaths of his brother Jordan Babish and his friend Jacob Kudla. The teens from Westland went missing in July of 2012. Their lifeless bodies discovered days later in a field on Detroit's east side. Yet when Young had his chance to apologize to the families, he did nothing of the sort.
I'd like to say sorry to the families of Ayanna Jones, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, and I want to apologize to them for not being able to get justice for their loved ones who was murdered in cold blood. And in respect for the peaceful protest, I want to say hands up, don't shoot, Black Lives Matter.
Lana Mercer of LouRockwell.com reports that now a Princeton-based educational test has found that not only do Generation Y, aka millennials, trail their overseas peers by every measure, but they even score lower than other age groups of Americans. Millennials in the U.S. lag in literacy, including the ability to follow simple instructions, practical math, and hold on to your hat, a category called problem solving in technology-rich environments. Worse yet, even the best educated millennials stateside couldn't compete with their counterparts in Japan, Finland, South Korea, Belgium, Sweden, or elsewhere. Altogether, the top U.S. Generation Yers, millennials, in the 90th percentile, scored lower than their counterparts in 15 countries. Black Lives Matter was completely clueless when Planned Parenthood ironically joined their movement. Planned Parenthood, funded by billionaire eugenicists Bill Gates, George Soros, and the Rockefeller Foundation, championed by Margaret Sanger, a woman responsible for the death of countless black lives.
In 1939, Planned Parenthood pioneer and leftist Margaret Sanger began the Negro Project. To bring people along willingly, she enlisted black preachers to support sterilization. She outlined the deceitful plan in a letter to Clarence Gamble of the Procter & Gamble